Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me today is Nelson Dellis, and Nelson is a five-time memory champion, and you might have heard of some of the incredible memory feats that he's done in the past, from memorizing 10,000 numbers of pi to memorizing Blink-182 songs, and so on. Nelson is incredibly impressive and does so much, and I'm very thankful for his time today. Today, Nelson and I are going to be discussing what a memory champion is. We're going to be discussing a variety of memory tricks as well that you can use to help improve your own cognitive ability and ability to memorize. Great episode. Really enjoyed chatting with Nelson today. Enjoy. Nelson, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For people who might not be familiar with you, or maybe they've never heard of the whole concept of, what a memory champion is, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the incredible things that you can do?
Yeah, sure. So the USA Memory Championship, which is the specific competition I've won 5 times now, is something that's been around for almost 25 years. It's, as you can imagine, a competition where people come together and memorize all sorts of random stuff, names of random headshots, big phone numbers, I'm talking like 300 plus digits, full decks of cards as fast as possible, poems, lists of words, things like that. And the US Championship, you're trying to memorize as much as you can, as accurately as possible against others. And then there's different playoff rounds at the end, culminating in this final event where we have to memorize 2 decks of cards and recite them on stage without making a mistake. And the person left standing is crowned the champ. So that's what I've won. It's something that I trained for many, many years. And, some of the amazing feats I can do are what I do in the championship, but I've also done some other big memory feats outside of that. I broke a Guinness record recently for memorizing cards underwater in a single breath. I've memorized 10,000 digits of pi. I've memorized the whole magazine, that kind of thing. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Especially I was always that kid in school that couldn't memorize anything, and I had to sit there and look at it over and over and over again. It's amazing to think just how in tune to that you are. How did you get into this, Nelson? Is this something that you've always been good at, or?
No, I wouldn't say I had a terrible memory, but I didn't have an amazing memory ever. The only reason I got into this was because my grandmother was suffering from Alzheimer's, and watching her lose her memory was always a difficult thing to see. Every time I'd visit, it would be progressively worse. But she inspired me. I didn't want to end up like her, so I ended up just researching the brain and memory, and I'm always interested in kind of these kooky niche things, and the memory championship popped up a few times, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I wonder how a lot of these people are doing these things. It seemed impossible. I could never do it. But I was surprised to see that the people who would win these competitions or compete or do really well, all kind of saying the same thing, that they didn't have a good memory, they didn't know about memory techniques, they learned them and then practiced, and then here they are able to do this insane thing, and they're just a regular Joe Schmo. So that to me was mind-blowing. I'd never heard of anybody training their memory. I didn't know even that you could change your memory. If you thought you had an average memory or a poor memory, I thought that's kind of what you were stuck with. So that all changed. And once I got a taste of what my memory was actually able to do, I've been hooked ever since. I can't. Feels like a superpower that I unlocked, and I don't want to ever give it up,
And now you're cognitively limitless, for lack of a better way to put it.
Something like that. Not always. My wife will say otherwise, but that's a different story.
Yeah, it's funny because we're never really taught how to memorize in school. We're told to memorize, but never really taught how to. And it's interesting, you saying that both for yourself and many others in this kind of space, that a lot of you didn't have naturally gifted memory, for lack of a better way to put it. It's not like you were immediately good at memorizing everything from what you've just shared. So how did you kind of go about training your mind, and how did you go about developing a better memorization process?
Yeah, so I mean, I started with an audiobook by one of the former memory champs. His name was Dominic O'Brien. He doesn't compete anymore, but he was the 8-time world champion in the early days of this sport. And he has a great book. He has many books, but the one I listened to, it might be a bit outdated, but it's called Quantum Memory Power. It's an audiobook. And so I listened to that as I walked to my my bar job at the time. And I was inspired. I was like, wow, okay. And the exercises in the book kind of like get you to believe that your own memory is powerful. And then I learned about the championship. I was like, hey, I'm going to enter myself into this thing, because memory is a tough thing to kind of like measure. Like, what do you memorize and then say, hey, I'm better at this, like day by day. So I thought to myself that if I train for this memory championship, I know what the events are. You have to memorize cards, you have to memorize numbers, blah, blah, blah. And there's specific rules and records, that are in place. And so I have a number to target, right? I have something to measure my abilities to, my progress to, and something to try to beat. So that was really important, because otherwise I'd kind of be fumbling in the dark with my training. With any training, you need some kind of feedback, right, to improve. And this is no different. So my training really was just doing those events over and over and over again, so that it became second nature to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like how you kind of bring in the I'll call it like key performance indicator side of memory as well. Like you mentioned, you need something to assess how you are progressing. And I'd imagine for you, it's not just getting faster at something, but getting longer as well, as you mentioned before, like memorizing up to 10,000 digits. I mean, I can't even begin to think about how I would memorize 100 digits, let alone 10,000. So I'd imagine that's the kind of thing that you can scale up over time. I haven't seen a whole lot of like data on that myself. I know we've talked in the past that you're a little bit more of like a data guy, computer guy yourself there. Is this something that's like being researched at all? Like how different memory techniques like help people memorize more, or improvement over a certain time or anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things that you're asking there. One, I think, is basically how does it affect the health of your brain in the long run? And then the natural question is, does this prevent Alzheimer's disease, or diseases that cause cognitive impairment? And the answer is, I don't think it's clear yet. I think in research terms, I think it is. I can't say for sure. I'm not there yet. But the way I always kind of compare it, or give an example about it, is if I imagine there's two versions of myself. One is memory champion Nelson. He's trained this, and he turns 85, right, in the future, versus Nelson, who's never discovered memory techniques, and he's 85. Who's going to be cognitively sharper? If we ignore all the possible things that could have happened, butterfly effect to either, right? Let's just say we're the same person. That's the only difference. I'd have to say that Nelson, the memory champion, would have more tools to, act like the cognitive ability is sharper, right? So I feel like that just makes sense, because as I would start to forget things, I'd be like, oh, well, I have this memory tool that's just intuitive to me now. I've used it so much that I would just start using it. I do use it intuitively now. So my brain has been rewired. That would affect that 85-year-old version. Whereas the other guy would just be struggling, and have no resources to try to help his memory. So that's one thing. The other thing is, are the people researching these techniques in general? And the answer is yes, because it's very interesting to see what happens in our brain when we think like this, when memory athletes memorize like that, because they've done side-by-side comparisons where you look at somebody just memorizing rotely, like what they don't know how to memorize, so they just repeat it over and over again, and very localized parts of the brain light up, right? Versus the memory champion, who's using some of these techniques that are very visual and spatially oriented. The whole brain is lighting up, right? You're using all parts of your brain, not just the part for memory, which is fascinating to me. And I think that kind of tickles people's fancy, because it's kind of like that whole, you're using only 10% of your brain, whatever that, probably made up number is. But when you're doing this technique, you're really using your entire brain. And that's probably why it works so well, why it's so powerful.
Definitely, definitely. Now, when you say this technique, are you referring to something more like a memory house kind of technique, or how do you kind of go about on the memorization side?
Yeah, there's a few components to the techniques in general, but when I say the technique, I'm usually talking about this memory house, or I call it a memory palace, or a journey method. There's different names for it, but it's all the same thing. But that is the technique that's used for the most impressive feats. This is what all memory champions are using. This is what was used thousands of years ago by ancient civilizations to remember important information to pass down in different forms. Not always a house, not always a palace, but some structure that they use to attach or mentally imagine attaching images to. Even the Aborigines, there's these things called, I think it's lakusas. There's these little like wooden boards that they build with little knobs and shells and knots and things like that. And they literally use that as their memory palace. So each of these little indentations or unique structures on this tangible thing hold a story, right? About, I don't know, their roots, or a lesson or whatever that they pass down. So you can literally look at this memory palace and follow along with what was attached there. And that's essentially what a memory palace is. It's just taking something spatial and attaching something spatial that you know very well, and you're attaching these images to, or imagining these images on, to help you remember that whole thing.
Seems like a much more organized way to think about something and remember something.
All in all, this is really just an organizational strategy, right? And that's the problem with memory, is it's not that we really forget, it's that we don't recall. There's a difference, because most people, if they're struggling to remember something and you give them a hint, they'll be like, yeah, and then they got it, right? Or you tell them the answer and they'll be like, oh, I knew that. They have a recognition of it. So that tells me that it's there, right? In most cases, it's actually there. You just can't find it. And that's an organizational problem. Like, you didn't organize your work, right? Think of like a cabinet, a file cabinet, versus just like throwing papers all over your office, right? That's the way you structure it, versus, let me put this in this file here. It's all neatly organized, easy to find later, right? That's memory techniques. What everybody's doing is just throwing pieces of paper in their office. And sometimes it's right there. Sometimes it's on the top and you're lucky, right? You say it. But most times it's buried, or you don't know how you're going to ever find it,
Yeah, improving the ability to not necessarily recall information, but the ability to make the connection to retrieve the information.
Yeah, to know how to access it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The analogy I'm going to use for it, because I'm a little hungry right now, I'm going to compare it to waffles and spaghetti. So spaghetti, things are everywhere in the bowl. It's a little bit of a mess. Yeah, waffles, you've got your nice little compartments where everything kind of goes right into. Yeah. So that's how I'm thinking about memory right now.
Or this is an even better example. Imagine you're putting, I don't know why he would do this, but it reminds me of the movie Elf, where he pours syrup on his spaghetti, right?
Yep.
All the syrup just like falls through, right? It's there, but it falls through. But in a waffle, it's so grid-like. If you pour it in, they get collected in these little spaces. You can get that syrup very easily,
Exactly. I like it. I like the analogy. How did you develop the whole memory palace technique for yourself there? Because when I was in college, I had, read about it on different articles online, and, being in grad school, I was like, hey, anything I can get to help me learn things and memorize things is going to be good. But it was something I found I really struggled to conceptualize at first.
It is a bit tricky, and it sounds, most people have this kind of first impression of it that like, wow, that seems like a lot more work, Nelson. Like, I'm just going to go the old way and rotely repeat something. But it's one of these things that you discover if somebody guides you through it the first time. You realize, oh shit, this is actually really powerful, and you get a better sense of how to do it. It's hard to kind of read sometimes and then put into practice and know if you're doing it right. So I've gotten that a lot, and that's unfortunate, because I want this to be something that anybody can get into, and it really is easy to use once you know how to do it. But sometimes it's just a matter of how the person you're learning it from explains it or wrote it, that it kind of can be tricky. So maybe you just got the wrong Cliff Notes. I don't know.
So
You
if
needed
you're,
my book. You needed my expertise. I don't know.
I was gonna say, if you were gonna teach it to someone, how would you kind of break down the memory palace here, Nelson?
Yeah. So let's take a very simple example that you're memorizing a grocery list of, say, 5 items. Okay. Most people don't need to do that, but let's just keep it simple. You can always extrapolate this to a grocery list of like 100 items. It's the same principle. So what you would need is, if you're using a memory palace technique, is you would need a memory palace. And what that is usually you choose some place that's familiar to you. A great first memory palace is just to use your home. Okay, we all know our home. We can close our eyes and walk through it from the front door to the kitchen. It's not something you have to memorize. You do it every day. It's in there. We're really good at remembering spatial information without really trying to memorize it. And what you would do is you would decide on a route, that stops at 5 locations, because at each location, you're going to place an image for one of the 5 items on your grocery list. And if you had 10 items on your grocery list, you'd need 10 locations. More, you need more. And there's other ways to kind of make this more efficient. You can combine images, 2s or 3s, so you can save space. But for now, let's just imagine we're memorizing 5 things. We need 5 locations. So I might say to myself, all right, I'm just gonna, location number 1 might be starting at the front door, because when I enter my home, I start at the front door, right? And then what would I do? Well, I'd walk in the house. There's the entryway. Maybe that's location number 2. Okay, number 3 might be, maybe there's a, to the left, there's like a living room, right? That could be location number 3. Then maybe it connects to the kitchen. That could be number 4. And then 5, maybe there's like a kitchen eating dining table, right? So I've just outlined, this is a made up place. You can try to do something similar to your own or tweak it, your own home, but basically the front door, the entryway, the neighboring living room, the kitchen next to that, and then the kitchen table. Okay. So then you have this list of 5 words. Just give me 5 grocery items.
We'll say like bananas, blueberries, milk, bread, and I don't know, beef.
All right. So we have these, a lot of those had a B. We'll start with, except for milk. That's fine. All right. So the first thing on our list is banana. So I would imagine at my front door, that's the very first location, a banana, right? An important part of this is to really exaggerate your imagery and make it out of the norm, bizarre, silly, colorful, using all the senses. So I'm not going to just put a little banana there, but maybe I can imagine the whole front door is the shape of a banana, right? And it's bright yellow. I can touch it. It feels like a banana peel. Maybe I can even cut it open and take some banana to eat. It's this massive banana. It's my front door now, right? So then you walk into the entryway, and your next word is there. It's blueberries, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine walking into your house and there's just like to the ceiling, hundreds of thousands of blueberries, right? Everywhere, right? You're almost swimming through these blueberries. And you can imagine what that would feel like. Maybe some of them get squished as you move through it. You got like, you're painted all red and whatever the blueberry color you want is, and you taste some and they taste good, whatever. Then we walk into the living room, we have milk. So maybe imagine a cow's there, right? Spraying milk all over the ceiling, all over the couch, the TV, and there's a moo sound, right? You can add all the sounds and senses as you want. Then we walk into the kitchen, and our next word is bread. All right. So maybe there is, a bunch of, everything's made of bread, right? So maybe the microwave is just a bunch of pieces of bread. The handle's made of bread. The sink is filled with bread. Even the tap is made of like rolled up pieces of bread or something like that. So bread everywhere, just a kitchen of bread, right? And then finally, the last location is the kitchen table in the corner, let's say, and it's beef, right? So I would just imagine that, maybe there's just like a big pile of beef, right? Maybe the cows from earlier with the milk all get ground right there in the kitchen, and there's just blood everywhere, and this ground beef is on your table. And I'm going there because it's raw and disgusting, right? These are the things that you remember. Yeah. So, okay. So we just memorized the list. Now you go to the grocery store and you're like, oh, what's the list? So the way it works is you say, oh, I put that list in my house. Let me go back through my house. So I go to the front door and I see the banana, right? I go in the entryway. Oh, I'm swimming through the sea of blueberries, right? Then I go to the room next to us, the living room. There's milk everywhere, right? Being sprayed. That's milk. Then I go to the kitchen, which is just made up of bread. And then I go to the dining table, and there's just the messy, bloody ground beef all over the place, right?
Yeah.
You've just memorized the list, you know? It may not seem impressive with 5 things, but you can easily do that for 10 things, 20 things, 50 things, 100 things. And it's the same process. You just need more images, more locations, but it'll all be there. And the beautiful thing about it, maybe doesn't matter for a grocery list, but for other lists, you could do this list forwards and backwards. You would know every single item. You would have a real grasp of the information and good control of the information too.
Yeah, I like that. And as you mentioned, you can really progress it up as much as you would need. So I'd imagine you could get to the point where, say you imagine yourself walking into like a bedroom or something like that. You could probably, cognitively store a different piece of information in like every drawer of your dresser or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then
yeah.
Then it becomes limitless as to how much you can store in a space. Now,
Yeah.
all of the memory palaces or spaces that you use, are they all places that you have been in yourself in person, or are some of them things that you've kind of developed kind of like in your head, so to speak?
Most of them are places that I've been to. For me personally, that's not a prerequisite, but I usually prefer those kind of places as memory palaces because they have the added memory to them. It's usually a childhood home or a place that I lived, or maybe a ex-girlfriend lived, or just a place that I have good feelings about, good memories. And that's just to help me enjoy the process, right? I love memorizing most of the time because I get to go to these places in my head and just like live there. Does it have to be like that? No, I've seen other people come up with memory palaces out of thin air. They just kind of make a general, just kind of like the one I talked through. Like I can picture something, so if I learn that, then that's a memory palace. I know a lot of people these days will use video games, like the maps of video games. Those aren't real, they are real on the screen, but you can use those. I have plenty of those. Never visited them. Some people even use movies, right? If you know the scenes from a movie, you can use those different scenes in the order that they are to be similar to how we navigate through this house. So anything that has structure and order that you already know can be treated as a memory palace.
That's awesome.
And it doesn't matter if you visited it or not. Even with, I did this once with a client once, and it blew my mind. We got into the metaverse, we met, and we walked around this place that we had both never been, and we created a memory palace together, right? We were on different sides of the country, right? Just putting on a little helmet and meeting in a virtual space. To me, that's absolutely wild. But yeah, it created a memory palace for us.
That's pretty incredible. And now you could almost like create like I mean, I think this is probably going to be up your alley more than mine, but like creating like a virtual reality version of your memory palace in a way, if that makes sense. Like if you've got something that you want to use to memorize things, but it's not a place you've actually been, I'd imagine you could actually create one in the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can, I mean, you even touched on it. I give this example all the time because people are hung up on like, oh, I gotta have all these houses. I haven't lived in many houses. Like, how am I gonna come up with memory palaces? I'm like, no, you can make anything a memory palace. Like this box of chalk could be a memory palace. And you think like, well, how? Well, if you just imagine small, like here's the title, right? That could be a location. Then the next word could be a location. This 12 could be a location. You could even, you imagine yourself even smaller, like every corner could be a location. Maybe every letter here could be a location. It's almost limitless what you could do with anything. And that's just this small thing on my desk. Imagine if I did that, but for my whole desk here, right? All the pieces of all the things on my desk, I did the same thing. You could have hundreds of memory palace locations just from that,
Right. It's kind of like how in the computer you create a new folder and then you can create new folders within that.
Sure.
Essentially,
Yeah,
any object is a folder, and then you can just add more and more to it over time.
Yeah.
as you were talking here, I realized that I guess my study strategy I used in grad school, it wasn't exactly like a textbook definition of a memory palace, but what I would do
Okay.
is I would go into the classrooms that we would be taking our exams on the weekends or something like that, and I would study there. And I would kind of look around the room at different parts like of the room as I was studying. So maybe the first half of the material, I'd look at like a certain corner in the room. And then the second half, I'd look at a different corner or something like that. And then in
Interesting
the exam, I would kind of like gravitate towards looking in those certain spots.
to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it actually helped me a ton or not. I'll admit I was not like first in the class or anything, but it got me to where I am today, and I'm
All right.
hopeful that that played some kind of role in it. So
Yeah. I mean, you were almost there. The one missing piece is that you would have to come up with a really bizarre out there image to represent the thing that you wanted, and then picture it in that corner, right? Not just study there. That does help, but it to remember specific things, you would have had to imagine it on parts of that classroom.
yeah, and I see a lot of people, they almost develop like, I guess they're like a memory mnemonic kind of thing almost, where like they get a word and then they start associating it with other words, and they
Yeah.
kind of get a little deeper like that too. This is an area that I'm very unfamiliar with myself,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting to see how this is continuing to evolve. A lot of people that listen to this podcast, we have students, we have doctors, we have PTs, we have a lot of different individuals covering a lot of different, backgrounds and disciplines. What kind of advice would you offer to them if they wanted to maybe apply like a memory palace technique to something more medical or something more healthcare related?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you got to do is create the memory palaces. And most people don't really know where to start. Like, do they create one? How big? Do they just use it over and over again? The rule of thumb is, there's going to be stuff that's day to day that you're memorizing. You need it one day and then you don't need it another day, or you need something completely different. Then there's going to be stuff that you want to just know forever, right? Part of your studies, your career, there's just information that you want to have. So for those ones, I would create a memory palace specifically for that information. So it only has that in it. That keeps it special, that keeps it untainted from other information. And it's always the palace that has that information in it. You can always reference it. Then you want some memory palaces that can be for the day-to-day stuff, that are constantly being rewritten, reused. And you need a few of those, because if you just keep using the same one over and over again, you're going to start getting confused, right? Like, oh, shoot, I used this one yesterday. Am I remembering today's stuff? Or yeah, you might have echoes of things you put there in the past. So what I suggest is maybe coming up with a little like catalog of memory palaces that you can cycle through, maybe 3 to 5 to start with. And you can make them maybe 20 to 25 locations long each. It's a good number. And, maybe day one, you're memorizing your to-do list. You use memory palace number 1, right? You use it that day, maybe even the next day, whatever. But then maybe the next time you need to memorize your to-do list, you use memory palace number 2, right? Which is fresh, nothing in it, right? And you could do palace number 3 and 4 and 5. And then when you're done, you cycle back to memory palace number 1. And hopefully by then, it's a little vague. The images that you put there are gone or ghost-like. And then it's easier to tape over. So that kind of memory palace management is actually really important when you're trying to apply it to, profession or a career or your studies, where there's a lot of information happening and you're accessing that information in different ways,
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Having some things that you're going to need for a long time and some things that you're going to need temporarily. Relating it back to my own experience for a second. When I was freshman in college, we all had to take general biology. And the whole section on plants didn't really relate to what I was going to be doing in physical therapy, in my opinion. So that's like that's our temporary thing, the plants. The long-term stuff, the anatomy, the physiology, that would go in what you said, one of the more like long-term specific houses. So our day-to-day turnover houses that we need the temporary information, and then a separate memory house or memory palace for that long-term stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And an important part to this too, as much as powerful as the technique is, our brains are just designed to forget things. It's what we all do. There's a forgetting curve for information that everybody scarily follows almost to a T. So to fight that, you need a review. And that just means going over the information more frequently at the beginning when it's new, and then tapering off as you get more familiar with it. It's always a boring point to memory. It sucks to review. It's not fun to study, right? It takes time. It makes you sleepy. Maybe it's boring. But the nice thing about the memory palace technique is that is much easier, more friendly, more inviting to review. And review now, instead of having to look over at your notes again and again and again until you're falling asleep, is you can now just visit your memory palace, walk through and see these bizarre images, the comical, silly, disgusting images. And you're in a place that evokes some kind of, hopefully, enjoyment or memories, right, to be there. So it makes the review process a lot more entertaining and inviting, right? Which, as the more you do it, the more you go through your memory palace for some information, the more you're building these neural connections that will strengthen the information and keep it or move it to your long-term memory.
How do you take that concept and apply it to something in like a short-term moment, like your memory competitions that you've been doing, Nelson? So, for example, like if I asked you to recite 1,000 numbers of pi right now, I'd be willing to bet that you could do it. But at one point you had to learn that in a very short amount of time. How did you go about like taking that review process and condensing it into a short period of time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so the big pi thing, I actually didn't have a time crunch. So
okay.
I was very slow with that. But at the memory championship, you're given a sheet of paper with 500 numbers on it and 5 minutes to memorize as much as you can. So first of all, I had a lot of us memory athletes come up with a encoding system for numbers. So when I look at numbers, I don't see numbers, I see already preset images for things. And it just matters the combinations in which those numbers appear. It triggers what images I have, and then what memory palace I put it in. But I have 5 minutes, so what do? I'm going through the numbers, memorizing, converting them, and putting them in my palace for about 3.5 minutes, and then I do the rest of the time. I just do another pass through, which is essentially review. That's how I go about it. In that 3.5 minutes, at the beginning, when I had my number system defined, it was slow, right? Like it's not obvious. It's like reading a book when you just learned how to read, right? You're looking at each sound and sounding it out, that's kind of what happens. But then as you become fluent in a language and a good reader, your words per minute would fly, right? Some people can read super fast, right? And maybe you're not even reading all the words, but somehow you're getting the gist of it all. So same thing. So I've learned this language that for numbers, and for me to go through numbers and visualize them and place them in my palace is very quick. And the more I practice that, the quicker I got.
That's awesome. I like that. I like that approach a lot. And I'd imagine once you've done that a number of times, it starts to get easier and easier to do that with other situations as well. So maybe not necessarily a list of numbers, but like you said earlier, a list of random whatevers. It's the same process. You have your process defined. Now it's just a matter of refining that process to the task at hand.
Yeah, because inevitably the memory challenge or the memory technique always boils down to kind of the same thing. I got to encode it quickly and put it in a memory palace, right? So whether I'm doing that with numbers, list of words, alphanumerics, whatever, if I'm just quick at that process, coming up with a picture, the memorable part, and then tossing it into a memory palace real quick, that's all you really need.
Yeah, definitely. Nelson, I know you've done a ton of amazing memory feats thus far. What's been one that's kind of stuck out to you as like your most impressive thing so far? Was it the 10,000 numbers of pi, or is it the current Blink 182 kick, or?
Yeah, so I did the Blink 182 discography. I could recognize all their songs. That actually wasn't that hard because I probably knew most of them. And I love to listen to it. So it was like a lot of motivation. I'm trying to do that for Taylor Swift songs now,
Really?
which I have zero. I know 1 or 2 songs, so this is actually a challenge. But it's not that hard. With music, it's actually quite easy for whatever reason. The pi thing was actually pretty challenging. I've also, memorizing a room full of people's names is always challenging, and I had to do that once for a on a Japanese in Japan for a business event, but for a company I was representing. They were going to see all their Japanese clients. And so usually at these events where I do that, I have to schmooze beforehand and get everybody's name or everybody that I can. And then I go on stage. Nobody knew that I was going to be speaking. And then they're like, who is this guy? I say, everybody who met me, stand up. And then I just fire off the names and tell them to sit down. And usually it's a big group. It's like 80, even 100 people, right? So the visuals of everybody standing up, 100 people standing up is really cool. And everybody's like, what? No way he can do this, you know? But anyways, for the Japanese people, I had to remember their names, which for me, you know, a white guy from America who sees Bobs and Joes and Smiths and, you know, Johnsons, having to learn over 80 long first names and long last names that are foreign in Japanese was really, really difficult. I did it. I think I made a mistake or two, but that one I'm probably the most proud of because it was, man, I was sweating, but it was good.
Yeah, you're on the spot in the moment there. That's impressive. I can't even imagine trying to do that. I have a hard enough time remembering, you know, the names of 15 people that I see on day to day, let alone 100 people that you just met for the first time.
With foreign names, yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Nelson, I know you've also got a lot of different resources, and as you mentioned, you do some coaching. You do, I believe, some Everest expeditions as well. Give me a little bit of rundown on all the other stuff that you do outside of just competing in Memory Championship, and where can people find out more about that?
Yep. So you can start by just going to my website, nelsondellis.com. That's the route for all of it. But I have, you know, my memory coaching. I teach one-on-one. If anybody's interested, I have my book is available on Amazon if you just search my name. My YouTube channel has a lot of resources, videos, free videos. I have my online course if you want to step up from that. So a lot of that, and I do speeches too. So a lot in the memory world there. I also run, I like to climb. So I have a small business where I run expeditions to, you know, some bucket list items for most people, Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp. There's some other ones, but those are the kind of main two ones that I try to run every year. And yeah, it's a memorable experience. And yeah, that's what I'm all about, is teaching people how to live more memorably. Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. We'll link to all of that in the description below too. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can check out everything Nelson is doing. Nelson, I know we covered a lot of different things here today. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything that we might have missed in our discussion?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common for people to feel negatively about their memory. And unfortunately, that kind of dictates how your memory is. So, and in this day and age, there's not much encouragement for memorizing, right? You have devices that do that for you. You can look something up in a split second. Why bother memorizing it, right? But the argument is there twofold. One is by memorizing something, it improves your cognitive outlook, right? The future of your mind, it'll be stronger. It also empowers you, you know, to know that you can tap into something, this superpower that you thought you never had is an amazing feeling, and it affects everything in your life. The other thing is I just think it's nice, especially in this day and age where you feel so removed from the human experience sometimes, you know, when we miss interactions and everything's just about tech and flying by you so fast, social media, blah, blah, blah. Having a memory skill, which is all crafted by your mind, right? A mastery of something that's happening in here, nowhere else, is such an amazing kind of way to connect back to who we are, right? Like as a human, right? This is like a human ability, right? And I don't need anything else to help it, right? And I can master that. It's such an amazing feeling that goes beyond what I can even describe. And it goes beyond just like being able to remember something. It's just this feeling of tapping into maybe the source or whatever you want to call it. And you're being yourself and being human. So I would encourage, my final words is to encourage people to just try and memorize something, because I think you'll connect with something that's long been missed I think in our lives.
I love that. I love that takeaway. And I think it's essential as well, because at the end of the day, when you take all these other things away, you're kind of left with yourself. So,
Exactly.
let's take this is a not so hard situation to imagine for me from the Northeast, but say the power goes out in that freak snowstorm, and all of a sudden there's no Wi-Fi, there's no cell phone, all those things go away. What are you left with? Well, take that situation and apply it to anything you're doing on the day-to-day. What do you do when, if you're in the medical field or healthcare field, what do you do when the patient walks in and, they explain things to you and you don't have the ability to step out, look something up real quick and step back in? Like your ability to respond in that moment based on what you know and what you've memorized can make or break the upcoming course of action, I'll say. So I definitely echo your point there. I think that there is a lost art of connecting with oneself in today's day and age, and increased reliance on using other means to remember things. And sometimes the best things are the ones that we were kind of given from the start.
Yeah, 100%. Said it well.
Nelson, I really appreciate your time today. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, I want to take a second and tell you all about AliRx. AliRx is a at-home food sensitivity and gut health testing panel. You order online and then receive and complete your test at home for food sensitivities. You then receive a custom report online through your member portal, and then receive personalized recipes and supplements that are catered to you based on your food sensitivities. If this is something that interests you, you can check out the link and description in my bio, and you can use the coupon code capital D, capital B, RAUN, capital RX, so D Brawn RX, at checkout to save yourself 20%. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.